My guest today is Alex Schultz, the founder of Turnbury Group. Turnbury has been operating in a food trading business for over 10 years, and the company primarily operates out of Hong Kong with a focus on Southeast Asia and the Greater China region. It's 100% bootstrapped, and last year it crossed $11 million in annual sales. Thanks a lot for coming to the Holdco Builders podcast, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
We are getting into all that. You moved from US to Hong Kong, June 2014. The rest is history. Please give me a bit of your background from Goldman Sachs days and what inspired you to go from Goldman to becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think my journey out to Hong Kong started a little bit before that. In the summer of 2011, I got a summer analyst internship with Citibank out here, and it was my first exposure to the region. And it was a very eye-opening experience. I met a lot of interesting people. It was a cultural shock. It was a great experience. So following that summer internship, I went back for my senior year of university in New York, and then eventually got a job at Goldman Sachs, working as a listed derivatives operations analyst. I was in charge of managing our desk commission calculator, as well as handling a lot of VBA projects, to make sort of a lot of our operations more efficient. So I think as a kid, I've always been entrepreneurial, but when I was at my time at Goldman, I decided that I wanted to move back out to Asia, and then I asked to be relocated. So I did about a year and a half in Jersey City, New York offices, and then I got asked to move back out to Hong Kong in the middle of 2014. So when I moved back out in 2014, it's been full-time ever since. I typically go back and forth, but to the US, it's sort of been my home for the last 10 years now. And I think, especially when I came back, 2014 was a booming time. Asia was booming. There was plenty of activity. There's a lot of energy. So it was kind of like, if you had an ounce of entrepreneurial blood in you, it was a great place to start a business.
So what was you're in a very niche business. How did you come up to this, or what was the story?
Yeah. So when I left my banking job, I originally thought that I needed to find some transferable skills to take sort of the expertise I had and then try to start a business off that. So because I was doing a lot of VBA programming, I was good at financial modeling, I decided I was going to start an app. And my app was going to be more focused on like a marketing efficiency promotion tool. And essentially what I saw in Hong Kong was there was a lot of businesses and restaurants and bars that, if you didn't have any people coming into your restaurant, you could literally blast a promotion out through my app that would then recirculate onto other apps. So you wouldn't have to log into Foursquare, into Instagram. Instagram wasn't there at the time, but Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. And this way it was just more efficient for you. So you could run a promotion for an hour. That was a little bit of sort of what I first got started with. I didn't really have the current business plan of getting into seafood trading at that point. I didn't know anything about it. It was sort of eventually that I was trying to fundraise this project. I was trying to do some capital raising. I was trying to network and talk to people. But at the same time, I needed to get my visa. So I had an employment visa with Goldman at the time. But since I left the company, I couldn't work for anyone else. But I really wanted to stay in Hong Kong. So I was trying to fundraise the new project, which would allow me to then get into an investment visa. So allow me to stay in Hong Kong for the duration. What eventually happened is I learned I wasn't a very good coder. I needed to learn new languages. I was running out of time, and I certainly didn't have enough money. And so I eventually was networking a lot. I even had to go back to the States for a few months to work for my grandfather. I did a part-time work for him. I was a caregiver, actually. He had a senior care business. This was all in the time period which I was still waiting for my visa to be approved for me to come back to Hong Kong and extend my stay. Let's talk about from like June 2014 to about March, April. There was a lot going on for me then. I was back and forth. I was working on the app. I was trying to fundraise. And then I was like, I had to go back and help my grandfather. Like I needed to earn some more money because I couldn't work in Hong Kong for anyone else. And all in the hindsight that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to even stay in Hong Kong because I had to work on getting this next visa, right? So I eventually was able to convince the Hong Kong government that I had a business with funding that was unique enough that there wasn't an individual in Hong Kong that could do this job, right? I was 24 years old at the time. I basically had come up with a business plan that my app was somehow utilizing my expertise from finance in the bank. And that was going to be the business I was going to use going forward. Now, at that time, I kind of knew that that wasn't really going to work out. It just wasn't gaining traction and I had to pivot. So I, at the time, was networking a lot and I came across, I had my name on a yacht club website on a crew wanted section. And basically I was just putting it there to see if anybody had a boat they were going to use on the weekends and they just needed an extra person for them to help. And around March, April 2015, there was a lady that reached out to me and said, I see you're from New York. Can you help me source lobsters? And I thought to myself, that's kind of crazy. I don't know anything about lobsters. I'm from Philadelphia, actually. I don't know how you came up with me being from New York. But what the heck? I'll take the meeting. So I eventually met with this lady. And at the time she was working as a salesperson for a Canadian lobster facility. She was a local Hong Kong lady who had just had a kid. And I think she was it was a very stressful period for her. I think she was going through a divorce. But what she told me was that she was just a salesperson. She was only able to work with one company. But if I were to be more of a broker, then I could, make some more money. And at the time, I was really like, I needed to earn some money to stay in Hong Kong and to continue to grow the business. So, at first I didn't think it was real, but then later on I found out that, you just kind of get involved in something, you kind of figure something out, you can learn something and then you can pivot later. So, it's a roundabout answer to sort of how I got started, in this business, but, it's sort of a, just a, networked my way a little bit and someone had reached out to me and contacted me. So, being from Philadelphia, I had no connections. I knew nothing about lobsters. I mean, surely I like to eat them, but it was just, I was reacting to something that I heard.
Before getting into lobster business, you leaving a banking job, leaving a job in Goldman Sachs, I met few people from, I was traveling to London like a year ago. I met a few guys from Goldman Sachs and they and many of their friends, he was just totally honest with me because he's been following the journey for a while and he really wants to be an entrepreneur. He's 40 now. So the question for you, what was the thought process and how long did you marinate this idea of actually leaving the job? Because you're good at it, good salary, you could travel, it's comfortable when it comes to compared to entrepreneurship. What was the idea behind this and how was this a month or whatever period it was when you actually okay, now I'm done with this?
Yeah, I think the mindset is that I didn't want to stay too long. I kind of gave it 2 years at the bank, but I wasn't really in a role that I saw myself wanting to be in another 5-10 years. And I think that it's sometimes hard to make any lateral moves within the bank. And I wasn't really in a client facing role. I was more of the middle office role. And it was more of I had looked at some of my line managers and I just didn't want to see myself sitting there in about 5-10 years. And I felt like at the time, it was more like I just wanted this name on my resume. I just wanted to show that I could, I could get into this kind of a company. But I think a childhood dream of mine has always been to build a business. And I think when I was on my summer analyst internship, I knew that I was still going to want to start a business at one point. And I knew that I actually was going to do it in Asia. So in a little bit of a hindsight, I sort of used Goldman to help me get out to Hong Kong because I knew I needed to get out here I needed a visa to originally stay here. So it was sort of something that I had been working on. As far as what the business was going to be, I didn't know. I just knew that Asia was sort of the place that was the most entrepreneurial at the time. I had known through that 3 months that I was working here in the summer that it was going to be the most inviting and easiest place to start as well. Obviously, I knew there's a lot of like cultural challenges, and of course, I had no experience starting a business before either. It just was. It was more that I knew that I was going to be able to figure it out. I just had a sort of a gut feeling that, look, put your time in, get the work ethic up, get out there, build up a little savings, and then see where we can go from there. I had, when I had left, I had a business plan. I did 6 months of trying to do this, kind of starting a business on the side, doing the side hustle, working at night. But life was really, affected at the time because you didn't have any friends. I had no support structure here either, right? I moved to a new country that I really didn't know anyone, no family, no friends really, and working all the time. So it was tough to manage all that. And I think at some point you have to let go and you have to say, like, this is the path I'm going to go on. And I sort of just jumped all in.
Why Asia? Because there's so much opportunity in US. People want to move to US to do business there. Why Asia for you?
I think I wouldn't have actually done it had I not had that summer internship. And that was a very lucky, it was an internship that I had gotten because I was interning at a startup back when I was a teenager for a few years that got bought by Citibank. And because I had interned there for a number of summers and a number of winters, I eventually wanted more. And I was able to get into the summer analyst program. And then it was London, Singapore, and Hong Kong that I applied for. And I ended up only getting Hong Kong. So, I think at the time I didn't know. I was naive. I mean, I was 21 years old. I didn't know anything, but it was more that once I got out here, I realized, wow, this place it's energy. It's electric. I mean, you hit the ground running. There's just, it just didn't feel like the US where things just move slowly. Right. I mean, and I think it's almost like you don't know what, the grass is, you didn't know really what was out there. You had to go and experience it before you could actually know. So to answer your question, it wasn't really, Asia was just sort of something that landed in my lap and I went with it. And I think it was a good ride. But back in that time, like 2011, 2014, things were really growing out here. China was working on the Belt and Road Initiative. The GDPs of a lot of Southeast Asian countries were increasing. Emerging markets was a hot topic. I mean, I remember in college, I was always interested in emerging markets. So it was just sort of, it was a place that I thought, would be a good place to start.
When it comes to this cultural shock, what were the biggest challenges? Was it the language? Was it, I don't know, food, people? How was it in the beginning?
I think, the cultural shocks, I've been here 10 years now, so I feel like my mindset's obviously different. But back then, I would say, the support system, there was no support system. The cultural differences were that people got into work later and they stayed up later. And I was kind of used to the opposite. There was more of like family run businesses out here. There was more like things were more close knit. It was more people were willing to take chances, but you really had to kind of assimilate to the system. You had to kind of learn, people had to understand you just had to spend time building relationships. It was, a funny thing is you would go to a restaurant and you would have to share a table with somebody else. Like that was a shocker to me. The first time I sat at a restaurant and I had the whole table to myself, and then one of the waitresses put someone sitting across from me. Right. And I thought to myself, no, this is my table, like what, you shouldn't be sitting here. But then I think like, especially Americans, they get so caught up in like, what's happening in America versus you go to another country and things should be similar to what you're used to in America. And I think that's something that I always kind of joke about with my friends is that things are just very different in places. So, everyone speaks English in Hong Kong. I didn't have so much of a problem with that. It was just more of like, I've gravitated to, there's a lot of friends that I met here, a lot of expats. So to integrate was easier once I sort of left the job where I could go out and I could socialize and network. But in the beginning, it was very challenging.
When I was doing the research on you, it reminded me a story. Have you heard of a toy company called Suru?
No.
It's founded by two brothers and sisters, Matt, Nick, and Anna, and they moved from New Zealand to, I think it was Hong Kong, but in early 2000s. And I was listening to this interview with Nick, and he said that they spent like $1 a day in the beginning.
Mm.
They were literally like sleeping in the bushes and like wild story. And they tried to find a manufacturing building where they could manufacture those toys for children, because they had small success when they were in New Zealand. And I was yesterday while doing this, these guys are doing now, I think, billions in revenue. Zuru is huge. And obviously they still fly between New Zealand and China, but it was just these are, I really enjoy those stories, because when someone moves from comfortable home, comfortable job to a totally new environment, because I did the same. I moved from Estonia to Australia like 7-8 years ago. I didn't speak English, and it has changed my life so much. And I just felt that I need to get into this environment. And from Australia, I went to Switzerland, and it's so much fun. So that's why the cultural thing, I think it's so interesting, because I know there are people who have done it, but some people, they never get used to it, and they never recover. They just go back home and just.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people I've met that, you come to a place like Hong Kong or any other new place, and it's like, you're either going to love it right away or it's not for you right away. I think it's, you have to, it's a bit of this survival instinct that you have to adjust to in the beginning. And to your story, I mean, I'm sure they've, in a similar situation, I mean, probably not $1 a day, but it's sometimes a sacrifice you have to make. But I think on the flip side, you look at that and you can say to yourself, being naive and being open-minded can really make you look at opportunities maybe differently than you would if you were just to be in your own country, because you approach it differently with just being more open-minded, right? I mean, they come here, they live on $1 a day. They probably thought before, and many people probably think, there's no way you could possibly do that. But I think it is possible. And I think you're able to challenge, you're able to push yourself a little bit past your boundaries sometimes when you just put yourself in a different situation.
And there was this quote which I've been reading when I'm in a tough position, like having this ability to figure things out. And when you have this sort of mindset, I think it becomes so much easier, because eventually you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that, or you kind of give up. And if you're an entrepreneur, I think you find every way possible not to give up, right? I think if you have a business and you're starting and you really believe in it, you may pivot, right? You may go and you might try to find a different way to go about it. But I think there's just a sense of, it's part of the journey, right? So.
Okay. What about the lobster business? The lady needed some help. So what's next?
So she contacted me. She needs some help. But we actually didn't do any business together. She didn't give me any contacts. We kind of fell off. It was more of that. I kind of took this. I had been doing a little bit of research because she was telling me a couple things. So eventually it came down to one time where I decided, all right, I'm going to go in on this. I needed to basically build up my connections. I needed to build up my network. So I printed out Google Maps. I took a map of Nova Scotia. I typed in seafood wholesalers. I marked a map on the whole map. I flew from Hong Kong to Nova Scotia, rented a car, and I literally just drove around, knocked on the door and walked inside and said, hey, I'm Alex. I live in Hong Kong. I have a business importing seafood. Would you be willing to do some business with me? And a lot of people sort of laughed. Some people took me seriously. They probably didn't think I was for real, but it's sort of the way I first got my suppliers. And now, 10 years later, I'm still working with a lot of those guys. But the way I had to start was the old school walk into the door physically, because if I were to pick up a call and they already had customers, they already had customers in Hong Kong, they already have customers in China, they're not looking to expand their business so much. So I felt like I really had to go above and beyond and physically show up at their door to get them to sell to me. And actually, I had a few, and eventually in that period of time, I also, I flew back to Hong Kong. I was working with a freight forwarder to understand what it would take to, once the goods arrived at the airport, what am I going to do? How do I take them out and how do I deliver it to my customers, which I didn't have at the time. So while talking to him, this freight forwarder, he said he had a friend of a friend who he thought was in the seafood business. And I said, okay, well, I have no connections. I don't know where to start. So let me meet with this guy. I eventually met with this guy who eventually became my first customer with a couple of his partners. They were a new business just starting out. But long story short, it didn't end well. It was sort of like, this was a new business. I was a new business. We were very naive. Things ended up not working well. But at least I still look at that today and I say to myself, well, that was sort of that's a little bit my entry into the industry. I had to pay a little bit of a fine, if you will. Like I had to kind of like lose to, it wasn't going to go perfectly well the first time through anyway. So it was October 2015. I sold 900 pounds of lobster. It was live from Canada, delivered it to the customer. And eventually, that order led to another order, and then it led to another larger order. And then, it kind of built up from there. Because in the beginning, you really just didn't want to talk the talk. You had to figure out a way to just get the product over. And, that really built a lot of trust. And then eventually what happened is this customer kind of introduced me, and I kind of met other customers throughout the time. I kind of actually realized where the customers were. And a lot of the customers are actually quite easy to find. They're in China and Asia. There's a lot of these huge wholesale markets where you can actually just walk in yourself, and they're all there. I mean, they're not hidden in faraway places. It's quite easy to find customers, but in the beginning, I didn't know where to go. I didn't really know about that. I mean, had I been born and raised in Hong Kong and I grew up there, maybe I would have known, but I didn't. So that customer that eventually never did work out, I was able to learn where the other customers were. And I kind of then slowly but surely found some good customers to work with. Basically, slowly built it up. A 30 box order, which is about 900 pounds, ended up, doubling and then doubling and then doubling. And then I got more customers. And then on the supplier side, I was able to build up the trust. So that conversation, I just walked into the door. I didn't, I could just easily call them now and say, hey, I want another order. So things got a lot easier after that.
How much capital it all required in early on? Because you buy the lobster, did you already find the customer? How are the payments? How does it work?
Yeah, it was very challenging in the beginning. I mean, when I started this business, I had maybe $25,000, and that basically included my personal savings along with I took out my 401k to start this as well. So the first orders had to be paid up front to the supplier, right? I mean, I had to do that. But a lot of these orders in the beginning were like kind of small. They're like $5,000 US, but I had to pay them up front. And then to make the deal happen, I sadly had to wait for the goods to arrive, and then they would pay me after it arrived. So I basically paid $5,000 up front. The goods came, and then once they arrived, I got the money, and then later on there was like another order, so I had to pay another $5,000 to the supplier. They'd ship it over, and I'd get paid. And so in the beginning, it was a lot of me having to pay up front for the orders, and then as the orders kind of increased in value, I had to pay more out of my pocket to work with these suppliers. And then each time I would go to a new supplier, I'd have to pay them up front. But eventually what happened was I was able to build up a lot of supplier credit, right? We basically worked out deals where I said, hey, is there any way you can get insurance coverage on my company? Or can you give me some payment terms and whatnot? Because it was very hard to get the customers to pay up front. I mean, they just weren't do it. And it's very hard for them to do it even today. But the suppliers, they operate differently. They want you to pay up front because they obviously don't know who you are. So it's more like I had to take a little bit of a risk one way or the other. And I had to ship before I could get paid. But being in Hong Kong and watching the goods come in and delivering it to the customer, I kind of could be with them the whole time, and they couldn't really run away from me. So that's a little bit of how it started. Yeah.
And how quickly were you able to go full time with this? Forgetting the app and all the other projects ideas which you maybe had in mind. And
I mean, I was full time. I basically stopped doing the app around October 2015. I kind of gave up on that, and I started working on the lobster business from October 2015 onwards. And I went full on. It was, obviously not enough money to cover living expenses or anything in the beginning. So we're suffering losses just to kind of get it up to scale. One thing led to the next. I mean, a couple of years, I worked on the Hong Kong market first. I basically was going from, let's call it, 1,000 kilos a week to upwards to 3,000 kilos a week, and then 5 to 10. And then eventually 2 years later, I got involved in China. I started selling into China, and that's really when my business kind of took off. I started importing to a lot of wholesalers in China because I learned how to work in Hong Kong. So it was kind of my jumping off point. I eventually, later on, someone helped me kind of get the business involved in China. The orders increased quite rapidly from 2014 all the way up until about 2019, to the point in which, like, today I do like over about 1 million pounds of product a year. So we're growing at about 20 to 30% per year from 2015 onward. So it just kind of, it became that, like, as I started working with one customer and one supplier, I started working with 2 suppliers and 2 customers, and then I was working with 4 customers and 2 suppliers, and then I'd had 6 customers, then I needed to work with like 6 suppliers. So I kind of grew it as I was getting demand.
When was okay, number one, how were you able to grow? So to have such a stable growth, did you do any marketing or something? You did something better? You had a better product, or what made the difference?
I didn't really do any marketing. This is not the type of business or industry that really requires marketing. It's just more of finding the right customers that, I think, like, you just find more customers, and then what you can do is you can kind of steal some market share because they're probably buying from somebody else. So my mindset from the very beginning is I felt like this is a volume-based business. You have to keep shipping to earn more. I mean, you're just not going to earn money on, like, you don't increase your margin as you grow the volume. I know that sounds like opposite to what it would be, but you do sort of earn some more purchasing power as you go along. But really, at the end of the day, you're trading a commodity here, and it's not like as if you can increase your margin. So the whole plan was I needed to find more customers. I need to find customers that essentially could just take more than my existing customers. And so I would eventually go into new markets. Like, if I went to Hong Kong and I felt as if, like, I was pretty saturated in this market, I had already enough customers that I was actually struggling on the logistics side to satisfy that entire market. I realized the only way to grow after that was to go into a new market where I wouldn't be competing logistically. That's when I eventually got into China. I started shipping to Shanghai. I started shipping to Guangzhou, Beijing, Taipei, Phnom Penh, Singapore. Like, so this is how I started growing the business. Is like, I took it from, you can't focus on just one city. You had to kind of look at other cities. And actually the business model is really, I replicated it in all the cities. I mean, I would really, at the point, like, probably 2 years into the business, I would say about 6 different suppliers I was working with. And so I had the capacity to ship more product. I just kind of needed to find buyers that were willing to pay quickly, right? And so it all came down to cash flow and how quickly I could turn over the product, quickly I could turn over the cash. So I spent time going into the wholesale markets in China. I spent time trying to find the right buyers that could really buy volume. I didn't really want so many customers. I just wanted, like, key customers. So I focused on just getting 1 or 2 large distributors in each of the cities, and then just selling to them on a consistent basis. And what also happened in these years is that you have to understand China was really growing. I mean, there was a lot of people spending more money in China. I mean, just the natural progression, the economy was booming, the market was hot. It wasn't like I was doing anything more. I was kind of growing with the market. And I think it was very easy for me to scale at that point because I didn't actually have to do any more work. I just had my same existing customers. Instead of ordering 20 units, they go to 40 units, and then they go to 60 units, and instead of ordering once a week, they're ordering 3 times a week. So it just was like, it was actually very hard for me to buy more product because I was exceeding all the credit limits. And I was like, I wasn't able to turn the money over quick enough to pay for my supplier. So that was a little bit of a bottleneck on how I was growing. But it just, in the beginning, it was more about finding the right buyers and making sure that those guys weren't going to screw me over. And then I think what happens is you kind of work with you build a lot of trust on the supply side too. I mean, there's points in which you are working with suppliers and they really want to sell to you because you can actually move a lot of product, right? And especially in the live market, they have to pay their fishermen, right? We work a lot. I work a lot with the processing facilities, the ones that hold the product before it's sent to the airport to be shipped over to Asia. So we have to spend a lot of those guys only have so much capacity that they can hold before they need to pay their fishermen. So they can't hold on to the product for too long either. So it's really like the suppliers work with the buyers a lot to just make sure the product is constantly moving, because they need the money they need to pay their fishermen. So they need to sell the product to get the money back. So what I found was it was a really like a partnership on the supply side to say, hey, Alex, can we help try to like sell more? That's when I would go about and like try to find new buyers and new markets. So, that I guess kind of like grew it a bit.
And for how long were you been able to manage it all yourself, or when was the first hire, or when you felt like, okay, I need more people?
I think when you say cultural challenges, I mean, in the beginning, Hong Kong, not so much of a cultural challenge, is that everyone speaks English. But once you go into China, it was a completely different market. I needed help. I needed someone that really spoke, Mandarin. So at the time I met, eventually my wife, but she was the person that kind of helped me get my business going. And she's the one that kind of was my first partner back in 2017 when we first got into China. And she was the one that kind of helped me, with sales, right? And finding which customers to work with or which ones weren't. Eventually we met a couple other, we had two salespeople. That were based in Shenzhen. They sort of handled a bit more of our China sales. And then we started getting into like doing a lot more daily shipments, or we now have a driver. So we do a lot of local distribution in Hong Kong, but we don't do that in China. So it just got to the point where most of the help that I have now is on the sales side. I do more of the sourcing on my side. It's really like the same amount of work goes into putting a 5-unit order and a 500 unit order. I mean, it's really not all that much work. It's more of that, like, does your source or your supplier have enough goods to ship? And so as my role, that doesn't concern me so much, like as far as manpower or whatnot. So it's just more like we're the marketing arm, we're the sales arm. We try to sell more and push into new distribution channels for products.
What about some of the challenges on early days, maybe first 12, 24 months, or I like to call them like oh shit moments, where like things were, a lot of stress were involved, and maybe something with the logistics or something like this?
Yeah, we had many moments. I had customers that didn't pay me, right? I had customers that overpromised they were going to pay me on X date. They never paid me. They'd run away. And we're talking large dollar values. I didn't really know, Canadian winters, what that meant. Like Canadian winters would have a blizzard come in, and then we'd have cargo that was bumped in transit. It would then have to sit somewhere for 24 hours, and we would get it later, and it would be 50% dead, right? And then you have a customer that says, well, I'm not paying for that. So, you have to be responsible for that. So a lot of times in the beginning, you have to build up the supply chain, and that takes a long time, because we ship a lot of the product by air freight. So there's only a certain amount of space on those planes. And when you're a new player in the market, you have to essentially, fight for that space. And during 2014, 2019, it was very competitive. There was a lot of Chinese companies that were moving into Canada and the US. They were buying a lot of product. They were basically taking a lot of space in the airplanes. So it was very hard to actually get the air freight. So that became a real bottleneck, is that a lot of my customers saying, hey, well, so-and-so can get the product here. Why can't you get the product, right? So it made me look like I was unreliable. It made me look as if I couldn't deliver. So it stunted growth a little bit. But once, it just took a little while for you to kind of get in a rhythm where you would be saved airspace, like on a weekly basis, where those freight forwarders would basically say, hey, Alex, we have X space saved for you. Here are your days of the week that you can ship. So it gave me a little bit more, it was a way for me to tell my customers, hey, like, we can guarantee this each week, right? So I'd say those two main things is, one, you worry about the payments from customers. Two, you had to worry about, logistical problems with the airlines. And then three was that you never know. It's a wild deal. A lot of the seafood I deal with is live and wild. So you never know what storms are going to come across, right? You never know if product is going to come in the way it's supposed to. I mean, you never know actually what you're catching. So in the beginning, it was like, I'm also very naive. Like, I don't know this industry very well. So I'm kind of just talking out of my, I'm kind of saying, I don't know what I'm really saying. So it just took time for me to get experience in the industry as well, right? So all challenges, but, that of course now is, 10 years in, I'm more so of an expert now, and those are easier conversations to have. But the beginning was dealing with the demand, figuring out a way how to keep the cash moving quickly enough. And now I just, that's really what I focus on more importantly than anything, is that, like, look, I need to find customers that are going to pay quickly so I can buy more product. I mean, that's just the, and also to secure airspace, like, you need to make sure that you're going to use it if someone offers it to you, right? It's all part of the supply chain.
What are your views and thoughts about when it comes to capital allocation? I mean, you've been growing 20 to 30% per year. What are your thoughts of what to do with the free cash flow at the end of the year? Do you invest it into your lifestyle, or how early were you able to actually do it? Or you've been always like, okay, let's put the money back into the business and grow it to a bigger, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in the food industry, you're not flush with margins, especially on the food and commodity side. You don't have huge margins, but if you can manage the business well enough, you have money left over, and you can put that in something like a real estate purchase, which we did that, and we have a self-use property. You can look at doing some expansion. We had a business that we started in Cambodia, where we are now exporting live seafood from Cambodia to Hong Kong. You can reinvest it. You have to reinvest a lot of that cash into the business because you really need to pay for goods. And if you just keep growing at 20, 30%, it's really hard to take too much of that out. So, I made mistakes in the past of taking too much out too early and then not keeping it in there, because all of a sudden there was a surge in demand, and a holiday period was better than before. And you almost have to pass on orders because, you have suppliers that are saying, hey, we can't ship to you because you either have too much outstanding or, whatever the reason. So I think it's in the early days, you have to keep reinvesting. I still reinvest. I still think it's important because I still value growth. I'm looking at, pivoting a little bit or going in a different direction, and I'm kind of doing a lot of research into that. But at the end of the day, I think when you have a product that's making money and there's not so much you need to change, it's just good to recirculate that cash and put it in there so you can just keep generating more profits from it. So you don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel, but I think you could always put it into real estate investments for safety and whatnot. And I know a lot of people that do that, especially a lot of people in the seafood industry, especially in Hong Kong. They purchase lots of properties, it's just, I guess it's a safe haven. But
I found one of your tweets, which you posted during the summer. Every single night I go to sleep thinking about cash flow. Every single morning I wake up thinking about cash flow. It's what keeps you in or out of business. You mentioned it so many times. One thing was that during one of those holiday seasons, you had some issues of not having enough of it. Has there been any other times where you're like, okay, again, I took too much money out of the business?
Yeah, I think, it's a nightmare, but at the same time, when you're bootstrapping a business, you every dollar counts. So I just try to collect money as quickly as I can. I try to work with paying my suppliers as quickly as I can as well. But when you're starting a business, if you're not generating cash, I mean, I always find a lot of businesses, they have grand ideas, but if it's not making money, you don't have a business. So, whatever business you're doing, you got to make sure that you're earning a profit. So, and the way you can earn future profits is just to make sure that you're collecting cash on time and quickly. So it's just something I think about all the time, because in the early days, I took a lot of things for granted. I thought that people would pay me when they said they were going to pay me on Monday, and then it comes 2 weeks later. And then I literally have 2 weeks of I can't do an order because I'm still waiting for money to come back. Right. So and I think that's the way for any business. Cash is king, as like everybody says. So it just allows you to, I've had some instances where, you don't get paid. So what do? Right. And then you have all this money that gets taken out of the business, and you still have to pay for goods. Right. So it's not easy bootstrapping a non-tech business, because you just need money to pay for goods. And a lot of times no one's going to buy your goods unless you have it first. I just haven't found anywhere where you can tell somebody, hey, buy my product, you pay for it first. I mean, maybe I'm not doing a good enough job sales or selling it or being convincing, but I think people need to see things before they buy it. So it's just been a way that I've grown. I've had to take a little bit of a risk on myself to kind of push products. But, it's when I think like that, it's not that I don't think about cash flow, because it's important. If you have a mistake or you step on a landmine, it's going to affect your other customers, or it's going to affect your business in other ways. So you have to just always keep it in mind.
Till this day, the business is 100% bootstrapped. Have you ever looked for investors, or what, if you would, what type of investors or what type of partner you would like to have? And currently you're growing 20 to 30% per year. Could you do it faster? Would you want to do it faster?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've had 10 years of experience doing this. I've learned a lot. I generally feel that there's other opportunities out there. I wouldn't look to bring an investor into doing what I'm doing now. I just don't think it's a business you want to do so much going forward. It's good. It pays bills. It's recurring revenue. It's, making some money. But I think, like, if I were to look at the next 5-10 years, I think my approach is going to be very different now. But I have a lot of good connections. I have a lot of good network now. So I think there's going to be more of a pivot to where I'm going to go in the future. And I really believe that there's a lot of potential now in the Southeast Asia area, or the greater China area, where there's been a lot of investment from governments. There's a lot of aquaculture investment. There's a lot of potential now where I think that in the next 5-10 years, I'd look to maybe go the other way, meaning, like, I've been doing a lot of exporting from the US and Canada into China, but I feel like I feel like it's time for me to switch. And I think there's a lot of potential, especially, I think there's a lot of oversupply happening in Southeast Asia. I think there's a lot of farming happening, a lot of seafood farming, where there's a lot of advances in technologies. I think there's a lot of companies that are going to have a problem selling their goods to the local markets. It's just going to be too expensive. So I think there's opportunities for, food or seafood items to be sent over to the US. So I think it's more about, like, acting in as more of a distributor in the US, or finding a partner in the US to sort of work on certain products or food related products. The US market is now so much more into healthy and nutritious foods. The metro areas are now, like, doing food takeouts. It's just like fresh food I think there's a lot of potential, like, with a lot of companies in a lot of countries, specifically like Thailand, for example, that have a lot of these amazing food production facilities that are able to export sort of fresh, ready-made seafood or fresh meals. And you can simply bring that over to the US and sell that, I think, at an advantage that's probably cost effective, more so than kind of doing a lot of these in the US. And I think there's still a lot more research to be done here. But why I'm confident about that is because I think there's just been too much investment going into Southeast Asia on these fish farms and seafood farms, where I think there's just going to be an oversupply. And I think they're going to be looking for a place to sell this, but they can't, the price point is just too high already for the local market, that a lot of businesses are actually been closing down because they haven't found a buyer for it. So I think this just needs to be a distribution or sales channel in the US to sort of get some of that excess supply into a different market. So I think there's potential there. It's what I'm, like, looking into more, because, I think it's a business. If you really believe it in the long term, you have to kind of focus on margins. And I think it's a little bit of it's a better direction forward.
Could you potentially sell this business, or rather not? It's too much. You being too much involved.
Yeah, I think you could. There's local trading houses that probably would buy it. There are seafood. There's always food distribution companies that are looking to buy, like, a seafood arm or whatnot. I think you could. I deal with a lot of product. I have, like, about 8 products. And we have a lot of markets. So I haven't really been actively looking to do that. I do know that in 2017, we started an e-commerce platform locally. That was a pretty good success. We sold that, and I've had a little bit of experience of, like, starting something and selling it. So I think that because of how quickly that went and how easily that was sold, I think that there's, the Asia market has a little bit more appetite for buying this kind of business. But then again, I'm not active on that. I think it's just things are going too smoothly right now to kind of give it up. So I think once the economy recovers a little bit, there might be more opportunities to do that. But right now, no.
Few more things I'd like to discuss. One is maintaining relationships, especially you can pretty much compare those relationship in USA, Canada, and the ones you have in Asia. How different it is, and what do you do differently with Asian relationships, so called? Because I think this is something when you want to raise capital in the future, you could maybe do it more easily in China for X and Y reasons.
Yeah, I think especially in Hong Kong, and there's a lot of second and third generation businesses that are very established, and I think they have a lot of money. I think you're going through a transition period now where relationships take a while to build. I mean, I know we say that about the US and Europe and whatnot, that it's always about relationship building, but they take a long time to form. And I think people like to see that you have success before they're willing to kind of do business with you. And so, you just have to back up what you say you're going to do. And I think there's a lot of influential people out there, and you just need to I think today it's about building your brand. It's about showing, what you're capable of doing. And I think opportunities will come to you after that. So it's more, relationships are very face-to-face still. I think you have to engage with people, and you have to get into their lives. You have to not be so pushy to sell right away, but it's more like, hey, let's be friends first. Let's develop this. And, people just kind of, gravitate towards that, and they'll see you doing well over time, and then they'll just want to be more a part of your life. Yeah, I would say it's not all that much different. I tend to think that people overreact to saying, "Oh, well, Asia is all about network, building relationships." But I think it's really, you have to approach it the same as you do anywhere in the world. And I think people just like to see that you trust them, you respect them, you do what you're going to say you're going to do.
Okay, so I always like to ask. And I'm asking from you as well, how has entrepreneurship and building Turnbury Group changed your life and changed your family life? I think we can compare you today and you when you were working for Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, I think, it's a challenging lifestyle. It's a challenging journey, but I think you can, it's not for everybody. And I think you learn a lot about yourself. One great thing that I've done is, moving to Asia and starting a business here. It's been about the entrepreneurial journey, but it's also been about the adventure and living in a new culture and meeting new people and just doing things I would have never done before. Right. And I think that has helped a lot in the beginning, because you have to be patient. In the business takes a little while to get going. So it's like you can stress too much about things not going so quickly. But later on, you can look back and say, well, I was able to at least, walk down the street and look at and do new things and explore new things or try new foods. Right. And that kind of helps with the early stages. Right. Today, I mean, I'm so much more knowledgeable about just running and owning a business and sort of knowing what to do. I'm better at managing risk now. I'm better at looking at opportunities and saying, this is something we should do. This is something we shouldn't do. And I'm certainly focused on growth. I think as an entrepreneur, you have to keep thinking about scaling and growth. You have to be looking to take some risks, but you need to take educated risks. I mean, you can't just go in and think that it's just going to go out according to what's on in theory or what's on paper. You have to make educated decisions. And I think that seasoned entrepreneurs are more successful in the second, third businesses or fourth businesses that they start. I think in the first business or two, you're learning a lot. You make a lot of mistakes, and actually you're catching up, and it takes too long for you to catch up. So I think it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. I think I was built for this. I've always wanted to do this. This is probably not the first business I've started. It won't be the last. But I think you just have to also surround yourself with people that are like you. Like, I think you have to be talking with other entrepreneurs. You need to, you want to put yourself in a position where I think you want to, you can succeed. And it's not for everybody, but I think if you find a little bit of success and you have those small wins, it can push you forward. So it's been enjoyable so far, but it's caused some stress as well.
Do you see yourself living there permanently?
This is a conversation I have to deal with a lot, but we're a little bit in flux at the moment, to be completely honest with you. We're at that point, like, do you start a family? Do you want to start a family out here? Do you want to start a family in the US? You've had a business for 10 years. You kind of know what that business is already doing. If you really commit and you kind of pivot and then you kind of go into another direction, you're kind of committing yourself to another 5-10 years, or you have to kind of give it some time to grow. So, to answer your question, it's 50-50. I mean, look, if we leave, we have to maybe sell the business. I'm exploring opportunities. So I don't have a good answer for you. It's a really tough topic for me at the moment, but I'd be open to probably return to the States and also be open to staying here. But it's a little TBD.
At least you have options.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Is like, once you become a Hong Kong permanent resident, you don't need to worry about visas anymore. And that was a challenge in the beginning. Is like, once you started a business, you weren't sure if you were going to be able to stay there. I think that's the reason why, like, Singapore is not a good option for some people, because you never know if you're going to be able to renew your visa. And in Hong Kong, you don't have that problem once you've passed 7 years. So, you could always start a business in the US, and I can always start a business in Hong Kong. And so that gives you a lot of options. So I just think, I have a very strong network in Hong Kong, and I got a strong network in the US. And so it's having options is a great thing. Yeah.
Okay, Alex, let's wrap up with the famous 5. How old are you?
I'm 35.
Favorite book?
I would say the most impactful book is actually from another fellow entrepreneur. It's a book called Starting from Scrap. His name is Stephen Greer. Honestly, I thought he was me. He actually is the guy that, after I finished that book, I went into the job and I quit. So he kind of pushed me into the entrepreneur life for real. And it's a good fun read. So,
married, single, kids?
Married, no kids.
What car do you drive?
I have a BMW convertible. I probably wouldn't own that if I was in the US, but here in Hong Kong, it's just the weather's better and it's pretty awesome views. So,
what's the best investment advice you've ever received?
I'll never forget, like, one of the first days working at Goldman, someone said, like, everyone was complaining that there's too much work and they were being overworked and whatnot. And this person said, it's a sink or swim kind of sink or swim environment, and most people swim. And so I kind of just relate that to, like, I think invest in yourself. You're capable of so much more than you think. And I think, things work out for you. If you don't give up and you just push hard. So it's, invest in yourself is kind of what I would say to anyone. And I try to encourage a lot of younger people to start businesses. I think today there's a lot of people that want to buy a business. And a lot of people are not so keen on starting businesses. So I just still think you can start a business, and I encourage that for people. I think people can do it.
And last one, where can people find you if they want to learn more about China or this mindset of after actually making this shift from quitting a job and moving to a foreign country and then starting a business there?
Yeah, I think just you can email me is the best, alex@turnburygroup.com, X maybe. So yeah, I'm also very involved in entrepreneurial events in Hong Kong. So, I work around the community a bit, and I know, so email is probably the best.
Okay, Alex, thanks a lot for doing this. Very interesting niche. Honestly, I've never talked to anyone who does what you do. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's always good to talk business and entrepreneurial activities. So thanks so much.